four-time world champion, the most dominant driver of his generation, and they just told him to leave. Not quietly, not diplomatically, publicly, brutally, and with names attached. Martin Brundle, Damon Hill, Eddie Irvine, all of them in the same week delivering the same message to Max Verstappen: stop complaining or walk out the door. And here is what makes this moment so extraordinary. Every single one of those men agreed with Verstappen's criticism of the regulations. They just couldn't stand that he was the one saying it out loud. But here's the real problem. This isn't a story about a driver having a bad season. This is a story about a sport that ignored its best drivers' warnings for 3 years, built the regulations anyway, and now, when those regulations are visibly broken, is turning on the man who called it first. To understand what is actually happening right now in Formula One, you need to go back to the summer of 2023. Austria. Max Verstappen, in the middle of a season so dominant it almost defied belief, stood in front of the media and said something that nobody really wanted to hear. He told them the 2026 regulations looked very bad. He used phrases like Frankenstein. He warned that the cars would be designed around a power unit that forces the engine to act as a generator for a battery, and that the result would be something that no longer felt like Formula One. He said, and this is important, that the active aerodynamics would make the car feel unnatural to drive, that the energy systems would create artificial racing, and that the whole concept was heading in the wrong direction. The response from inside the paddock was polite dismissal. The regulations had already been signed off, the manufacturers were committed, the FIA had its roadmap. And Verstappen, dominant and comfortable in his Red Bull, was told, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, to relax. Nobody was ready to listen. And now it is 2026 and everybody is paying for it. Let's talk about what these regulations actually do, because this is where the story gets technical, and this is where most people miss the real point. The 2026 power unit runs on a near 50-50 split between internal combustion and electrical power. That sounds progressive. What it means in practice is that the electrical motor, the MGK, now produces 350 kilowatts. That is almost 3 times what it produced under the previous rules. The problem is that the battery capacity did not increase to match. It is still capped at 4 megajoules. So you have 3 times the electrical demand feeding from the same sized reservoir. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a water pistol that now fires 3 times as hard, but the tank is the same size it has always been. You run dry faster, much faster, and when the battery drains, the car loses roughly half its total power output, not from a mechanical failure, not from a crash, just because the energy ran out. That is the moment Verstappen calls anti-racing. That is the yo-yo effect. A driver pushes hard, deploys the battery, makes an overtake, and then immediately becomes a sitting target on the next straight because the battery is empty and the car is crawling while the engine is harvesting energy instead of accelerating. One car doing 290 kilometers an hour, the car behind fully charged doing 340, the gap closes in an instant and the position reverses, and then it reverses again. It looks like racing. It isn't. Now here's something the casual viewer probably doesn't know. In qualifying, where you are supposed to be pushing to the absolute limit for one lap, the energy constraints are so severe that drivers are actually lifting and coasting on the straights at Suzuka, one of the fastest tracks on the calendar, to harvest enough charge to have power for the next corner. Leclerc called it a joke at Suzuka. Verstappen called the whole thing anti-driving. And the FIA, who heard all of this, is now in a series of emergency meetings trying to find a fix before Miami. And this is where it changes. Because while all of that is happening on the technical side, Max Verstappen is also dealing with a Red Bull car that has turned into a nightmare. The RB22. At Suzuka, a circuit where Verstappen had taken pole position for 4 consecutive years, he qualified 11th. He was knocked out of Q2 by Arvid Lindblad, a teenager, racing for Red Bull's junior team. On his radio, Verstappen said 3 words: "It's completely undrivable." The car oversteers on entry and understeers through the corner, an almost paradoxical set of handling problems that the team cannot resolve. Red Bull brought upgrades to Japan, revised sidepod inlets, a new floor, a different engine cover. The upgrades went on Verstappen's car. They made things worse. Isak Hadjar, Verstappen's teammate, ran the standard car, the one without the upgrades, and made it through to Q3. Let that sink in for a moment. A rookie in the base spec car qualified ahead of the four-time world champion running an updated package. Red Bull's team principal Laurent Mekies admitted to significant shortcomings in the car. Sources have since reported that the team is considering abandoning the RB22 project entirely and diverting resources to 2027. Red Bull, the team that built cars so dominant that Verstappen once won 15 races in a single season, is now 9th in the constructors' standings, behind Alpine. So when Verstappen walks out of Suzuka and tells the BBC he is thinking about whether F1 is worth it anymore, the question isn't whether he is being dramatic. The question is how anyone could be surprised. Subscribe now, this is where the story gets complicated. Because here is the part that no one is talking about properly. When Verstappen says he does not enjoy the racing, and when he says this has nothing to do with the Red Bull's pace, he is making a very specific argument. He is saying the problem is not his team. The problem is the formula itself. And the reason that distinction matters is that it changes his options entirely. If the problem were just Red Bull, Verstappen could switch teams. Mercedes wanted him last year. Toto Wolff has never hidden his admiration. But Mercedes is currently winning races with Kimi Antonelli, a 19-year-old who has taken back-to-back pole positions and back-to-back victories in his debut season. There is no seat at Mercedes, and even if there were, Verstappen would still be in the same 2026 formula, lifting and coasting on the straights, gaming battery deployment instead of driving. Think about that from Verstappen's perspective. You have won 4 world championships. You have driven some of the fastest laps in the history of the sport. You have competed flat out for over a decade. And now someone is telling you that the key to going fast is to back off the throttle on the straight, downshift a gear to harvest more energy, and manage your battery like a mobile phone on 1%. It doesn't feel natural to a racing driver. That is his exact quote. And he is right. But here is where the criticism of Verstappen becomes interesting and where it reveals something important about how this sport actually works. Martin Brundle, one of the most respected voices in Formula One media, said Verstappen's complaints had become boring. He said the 4-time champion should either go or stop talking about it. He compared Verstappen unfavourably to Michael Schumacher, arguing that Schumacher would have closed the door, thumped the desk privately, and walked out smiling. He also said, in the same breath, that Verstappen's points were well made and that the situation was genuinely wrong. So Brundle agrees the regulations are broken. He just wants Verstappen to complain about them quietly. Damon Hill, 1996 champion, told the BBC that if Verstappen is unhappy, he should stop and do something else. He also added, and this is the part that got less coverage, that if Verstappen was using his public platform as leverage to push for rule changes, it probably wouldn't work. Hill wasn't arguing that the regulations were fine. He was arguing that protest is futile. And then there is Eddie Irvine, who gave the most quoted response of all. F1 doesn't need Max, Irvine said. There are plenty of talented drivers. It's tough for him to find himself in the middle of the pack, but considering his salary, there are over 50 million good reasons to stay. In the same interview, Irvine described the 2026 regulations as dangerous, said the cars should not be made eco-friendly at the top level of the sport, and called the safety situation alarming. His reference point was the crash at Suzuka between Oliver Bearman and Franco Colapinto's Alpine, a 50G impact, which Irvine compared to an accident that killed a driver in Japanese Formula 3,000 decades ago. So the pattern is clear. Brundle thinks the formula is wrong, but Verstappen should be quiet. Hill thinks Verstappen has no leverage. Irvine thinks the regulations are dangerous, but F1 doesn't need its best driver. The establishment has drawn a line in the sand, and that line says you can be unhappy, but you cannot be loud about it. Especially not if your team is also struggling. And this is the real story. Not whether Verstappen will leave, not whether the sport will survive without him, but whether the people running Formula One will address the structural problems that have turned its best driver into a bystander before it is too late. Because the FIA is meeting. Right now, during the April break, there are working groups and emergency sessions trying to find fixes for the energy management problem. The proposals on the table reportedly include reducing the MGK peak output, raising the super clipping threshold, and adjusting the fuel flow limits. Miami is the target. The FIA's technical director Nicolas Tombarzis has confirmed they have options ready. Options they held back deliberately, he said, to avoid acting on immature data. That is worth pausing on. The governing body had fixes in reserve and chose not to deploy them until the problems became impossible to ignore. 3 races in. Teams struggling with reliability, speed differentials of up to 50 kilometers per hour between cars at different battery states, a safety concern, not just a spectacle one. And Verstappen, the driver who predicted all of this in 2023, finishing 8th at a circuit he once owned. Now here is the question that is hanging over the rest of the 2026 season. Verstappen has an exit clause in his contract. It is tied to his championship position at the summer break. If he is outside the top 2 by August, which, given that he has 12 points from 3 races and Kimi Antonelli is already leading by a significant margin, looks almost certain, he will have a window from August to October to activate it. Sources close to Verstappen told ESPN he is leaning toward a sabbatical rather than full retirement. Red Bull is reportedly willing to pay him to stay out of racing in 2027 in the hope he returns for 2028 with renewed motivation. But here is what nobody in the sport wants to say out loud. A sabbatical is not a guarantee of return. Niki Lauda came back from his 1979 retirement. Schumacher returned in 2010. But for every Lauda and Schumacher, there are drivers who left and discovered that the thing pulling them away was stronger than the thing pulling them back. Verstappen is a new father. He races at the Nürburgring for the joy of it, competing in GT3 with 150 cars on the track, no team orders, no energy management, just driving. He runs his own sim racing team. He has options outside of Formula One that are not consolation prizes. They are things he genuinely loves. And if the FIA's fixes in Miami are not enough, if the yo-yo racing continues, if the qualifying sessions remain a battery harvesting exercise, if the fastest driver in the world is still stuck behind an Alpine because he has no charge left on the straight, then the argument for staying becomes harder to make. The 50 million reasons Irvine mentioned are real, but Verstappen has been telling anyone who will listen that this has never been about money. He has won everything there is to win in this sport. He does not need another contract. He does not need another trophy. What he needs is to feel like a racing driver again. And the brutal irony at the center of all of this, the thing that makes this story genuinely historic, is that the men telling him to leave or be quiet are the same men who, if you strip away the politics and the television contracts and the manufacturer relationships, privately agree with. Everything he is saying, the regulations are broken, the FIA knows it, the teams know it. The commentators know it, the drivers know it. The only difference is that Verstappen said it first, and he said it loud enough that it could not be ignored. And for that, the sport is telling its greatest active driver to just leave. Whether he does or not, that decision might not just define the rest of Max Verstappen's career. It might define whether Formula One still deserves to call itself the pinnacle of motorsport. If you have made it this far, drop a comment below. Do you think the FIA's fixes in Miami will be enough to keep Verstappen in the sport? Because the answer to that question matters more than any race result this season. If this video gave you something to think about, hit subscribe and like. There is a lot more of this story still to tell.